So today is February 25th, 2019, and I am about to start watching Game of Thrones Season 1 all the way up to 7 again, rewatching it, to lead up to Season 8. So by the time you see this clip, it'll either be Game of Thrones Season 8 is about to begin and the hype is unreal, or Game of Thrones Season 8 has just finished and Game of Thrones is done forever. And so I just wanted to kind of quickly film this moment before I start so that it's going to be in my video so that, I have something to remember this kind of final proper run through by. Game of Thrones is my favourite TV show of all time, or at least I think it is. I've been kind of conflicted about it over the last couple of days, but to say that it has changed my life would be a bit of an understatement. And with the show now completely finished, I thought that it would be nice to kind of just make this one gigantic video to talk about basically everything. So basically what I'm going to be doing with this video is covering all 8 seasons in detail, looking at the directing, the acting, the stories, the characters, all that good stuff, and also giving you a little bit of my personal history with the show, because I think it will really help to kind of show you why this show is so important to me and why it's so important to many others as well. So let's start off with a quick story about how I discovered the show. Now, if you go to school in the UK, you will most likely have to take a set of exams called Common Entrance, basically a set of exams you take to get into high school. And the weekend before the exam week, we were basically told to just kind of relax, to get all the stress out and just enjoy life for the last 2 days before we took the exams. And this was back in 2014. I was a big Arrow fan at that point, and I wanted to start a new series. And I'd always heard lots of great things about this Game of Thrones. The only things I really knew about it was that there was a dwarf, a girl with silver hair, and a guy called the Hound. And also that it had its fair share of nudity. So of course, 12-year-old me was pretty interested. And I started watching the show. I watched episode 1, and yeah, I didn't really get it. Obviously, I knew it was some pretty extreme stuff with the violence and all the rest of it, but I was like, I'm intrigued, so let's see where it goes. So I left it at that episode and took those exams, and after the exams had finished, my parents took me on a trip to Scotland, and I remember throughout that whole week just kind of dreading that trip. I just finished exams, I had just turned 13, I wanted to watch that new Tom Cruise movie that was coming out. Why on earth would we go to Scotland out of all the places in the world? That trip would end up being one of the most memorable trips of my life. Why? Because of Game of Thrones. We were constantly on the road. It was 6-hour drives, 5-hour drives, 4-hour drives, and during those long journeys, I would be watching Game of Thrones. By the time we got to the hotel, I finished season 1 and I was just hooked. I was invested in the story, the characters, the world. I knew who my favorite characters were and who I hated. And I didn't really fully get the story. Like, I thought Bronn was Yoren, and I didn't really get how or why Jon Arryn died, but I knew this was something special. And over the course of that trip, I would go on to watch seasons 2 and 3 and fall even deeper in love with the show. But now let's actually talk about season 1. It's awesome. Of course, you do need sex and violence to kind of get you through the first couple of episodes because it is very complicated, but the writing was truly incredible. And I'd say that it was by around the time Ned gets wounded that I was truly watching the show, properly invested. And looking back on season 1 now, after having seen it quite a few times, the character work is really incredible. Like I said, I knew who I liked, I knew who I didn't like, and over the course of the next few years, of course, some of those feelings would change pretty drastically. Even the filmmaking was awesome. It's not quite as flashy and high budget as the later seasons, but they really did the best with what they had. The cinematography, the production design, costumes, locations were all stunning, and even the fight scenes were fun. I'll always remember Bronn beating Savardis by playing dirty, or Khal Drogo tearing this guy to shreds, or Jorah slicing this guy in the mouth. It was all really grounded and brutal and had a genuine weight to it, and that applies to every single aspect of the series. The characters feel far more human than most characters you see in fantasy movies or shows. There was political intrigue, the backstabbing, and everything was just so interesting. One last thing about season 1. As I said, I was 12, turning 13 at the time, kind of beginning to discover who I was. I had never really related to any character I watched on screen, and then along came Tyrion. This guy was smart, charismatic, and just really awesome. He was never the biggest or strongest guy in the room, and I related to that. He was the smartest and most confident, and the line,
"Never forget what you are. The rest of the world will not." Wear it like armor, and it can never be used to hurt you.
Is just fucking perfect. I use that shit in my daily life, and I'm sure many others do as well. I think it was Tyrion who kind of served as my entry point into this world, and even though the writing for the character got weaker and weaker after around season 5, I will forever be grateful to the writers and Peter Dinklage for creating that character. Oh yeah, Ned Stark dies, that was a pretty big thing. It was commonly seen as the biggest shock on TV back then, and yeah, it truly got under my skin. Really incredible. It gets better. We start off with so much more momentum. The War of the Five Kings, boom, you're in it. You got Renly, Robb, Stannis, Joffrey, and the overly ambitious fool Balon Greyjoy. The intensity is there, the conflict is out in the open, you know who you're rooting for, and it's just so much fun. Out of all the seasons, I'd say this and also season 3 are the ones where you really got to see the Game of Thrones being played the most. And at the core of that, of course, is my man Tyrion. I mean, him and Bronn, and also Podrick, they have basically all the funniest and most iconic lines.
I'm not threatening the king, sir. I am educating my nephew. Bronn, the next time Sir Meryn speaks, kill him.
There's no cure for being a cunt.
And the trick scene where he tells each member of the small council a different piece of information to see which one of them rats him out to Cersei is some of the smartest shit I have seen in my entire life. In a way, it feels like everything that was introduced in season 1 is amplified. Jon and Arya go on much more interesting adventures, you begin to feel sorry for Sansa, Jaime and Joffrey become a little bit more unlikable. You know how you have certain storylines in each season that you like more than others, and some you kind of look forward to more than others? Well, for me, Stannis was just kind of the one that was just there. I never really felt super invested in the character, and yeah, I just wanted to put that out there. Also, let's talk about Jon real quick. Pairing him up with Ygritte was a stroke of genius, because Jon, in my opinion, is kind of like Captain America. He's not super interesting on his own, just kind of exists and does some heroic stuff. So putting him with Ygritte was like pairing up Steve with Black Widow in The Winter Soldier. Their scenes were some of my favourites because of the stark contrast between them, and they played off each other really well. We also got introduced to some other fan favourites like Jaqen, who we can all agree peaked in season 2. He wasn't nearly as good in season 5 and 6, and of course we also got Brienne. The Battle of the Blackwater was amazing. Tywin and Arya are probably the most underrated pairing in the series, and Tywin's horse shitting on the throne room is one of my all-time favourite Game of Thrones shots. Oh yeah, I just realised we haven't talked so much about Bran. Just kind of a dull character, to be honest, not much to say. Season 3 is probably the strongest from a dramatic point of view. Sansa's King's Landing stuff is at its best here, especially when you put Shae, Marjorie and Olenna into the mix. And Diana Rigg, what a legend.
Bring me some cheese.
The cheese will be served after the cakes, my lady.
The cheese will be served when I want it served, and I want it served now.
This was also the turning point for Jaime's character, which is one of the biggest character shifts in the show. The bath scene features some of the best acting I've seen on the show. Yeah, season 3 definitely has some of the best character moments. We haven't talked much about Dany so far, and that's because 1 and 2 were kind of average for her. She really gets going in 3. A lot of her side characters come in this season: Grey Worm, Missandei, Barristan, Daario, who at the time was played by Ed Skrein. The first proper Dracarys scene where she reveals that she can speak Valyrian was perfect, and you really get to see her become a leader and see her for what she truly is, which is a good person, not like the way they made her in season 8, but more on that in a bit. One of the things that separates the show from others is that it's able to balance tone so perfectly, and what I mean by that is it's obviously a very serious story, and yet there are moments that feel quite over the top in a nice way, and also moments that are just straight up funny. And they're able to keep everything feeling so consistent, and that's one of the greatest qualities about the show in my opinion. Finally, you can't talk about season 3 without talking about Robb's storyline. Richard Madden is great, but Michelle Fairley is just wow. The scene where she talks about Jon Snow is just some of the best acting on the show. I love watching people strategize and deal with war on a more complex level. The fighting is fun, but for me, the thinking that goes into war is far more fascinating. And we get a lot of that in seasons 2 and 3. The uneasy alliances that are created during these seasons, especially between Lannister and Tyrell, were a lot of fun to watch. but I really liked the Rob stuff here. Watching him lead and show mercy or execute someone felt really realistic and was something that I'd never really seen before in an entertainment property of this kind. And all the different decisions he makes aren't just fun to watch, but they're all building blocks to what many consider to be the most shocking moment in TV history. Yeah, the Red Wedding was very painful to watch, but also a stroke of writing genius. And I'm crediting George R.R. Martin, by the way, not D&D, because, you know, the Red Wedding was his idea. It is, of course, a shock, but what makes it great is that, like Ned's death, or actually quite a few deaths on the show, like Renly or Viserys, or, you know, all the effective deaths, you can go back and watch their decisions and see exactly what led them to their demise, as opposed to some of the shit in later seasons. And on top of that, David Nutter's directing was perfect. So this is my favourite season of Game of Thrones and was the season that was going on when I started watching the show, which meant that I had quite a bit of it spoiled for me, but quite frankly it just didn't matter. For me, this was when the show found that perfect balance between the dramatic side and the spectacle side, because we had so many moments of incredible drama, like the trial scene, which has the best piece of acting on the show. But we also had some really great fights, like the Mountain and the Viper, Brienne versus the Hound, the Battle of the Wall, which is top 3 battles for me, easily the most emotional, and this is the one that should be compared to Helm's Deep. It's a nighttime scene, but you can see it much better than the Winterfell battle. The structure is basically flawless, the tactics are smart, and Neil Marshall directed the shit out of the fights, especially that 360 long take sequence. Remember back when characters like Gren and Pip had deaths that were more emotionally effective than lead characters? Yeah, those were the days. I also think Season 4 has the best deaths collectively, the most satisfying in Joffrey, Lysa, and this jackass who thought he could take on one of Dany's champions, the most shocking with Oberyn and Tywin, and the most emotional with Ygritte and Shae. Season 4 does have one or two minor structural issues, but I definitely put it up there with the likes of True Detective Season 1 and The Leftovers Season 3 as one of the great seasons of TV. For a long time, Season 5 was kind of seen as the weakest one, but it is quite special to me because it was the first time I watched Game of Thrones along with everyone else. I was up to date, it was my first year at my new school, and all my friends had begun watching the show, so we were all really excited. There was this sense of community that I had never really experienced with the show before, and so that was really special. And I'd say that definitely made up for the lack of quality in Season 5. Obviously there were some pretty nice moments, even in the earlier episodes. Arya meets Jaqen, Jon becomes Lord Commander and kills Janos Slynt, Tyrion meets Daenerys, which back then was a pretty big deal. The two big introductions in this season, in my opinion, were the Faith Militant, which was fun at first, especially seeing Jonathan Pryce, and Dawn, which gave us Jaime and Bronn, a fun pairing. One thing I noticed about Jaime and Bronn, which I think is really smart, is that in this scene, Bronn does not make the same mistake that Brienne did when travelling with a well-known figure like Jaime Lannister. Brienne got them exposed because she didn't set up their cover identities properly, but notice the first thing that Bronn says.
Who are you?
Cooper. This is Darnell.
It just shows how well the writers actually know their characters, something that I guess would be proven wrong in Season 8, but again, we'll get to that. But yeah, Dawn was terrible. It had the worst fight scene in the show, some of the most cringe-worthy acting, and rat shit dialogue.
You want a good girl, but you need a bad pussy.
I mean, that line has already been made fun of quite a lot, but my god is it terrible. Another thing I want to touch on is Tommen. Now, we all hated Joffrey. He was a cunt. Like, I know they don't really say that word in America, but here in England we do say it quite a bit, so yeah, if anyone deserves it, it's Joffrey. He's a cunt.
I am the king! I'm not tired! You're talking to a king!
He really was a cunt, wasn't he?
Mad respect to Jack Gleeson, by the way, what an actor. I think they did a really good job of juxtaposing Joffrey's rule with Tommen. Tommen is quite possibly the most incompetent character on the show. He literally gets nothing done. His wife gets imprisoned and then his mom gets imprisoned and the fool does nothing about it. Watching Tommen actually kind of made me miss Joffrey because say what you will about the guy, but he would never have let this shit slide. Another moment that got to me was Barristan's death. Like many, I wanted more from him, and I think the actor was also pretty upset because Barristan is still alive in the books. That was another waste of potential for me and a kind of a slight sign that D&D didn't really know what they were doing. By the time Season 5 came out, we were all realizing the trend that the penultimate episode is when some of the major stuff goes down. Ned dies, then Blackwater, then Red Wedding, then Battle of the Wall, and of course with season 5 we had the double whammy of Shireen's death and the pit fight. However, I think we can all agree that none of us were expecting Hardhome to be as good as it was. It was our first proper introduction to the White Walkers, but also Miguel Sapochnik's skills as a director of big sequences. It was scary, exhilarating, and on top of that, it actually worked for the story. The Wildling arc in many ways was brought to a satisfying close in that episode, with Jon kind of following Mance's footsteps, but also we got a first proper taste of the White Walkers, and it was glorious. And that final tracking shot and that stare down between the Night King and Jon is masterful filmmaking. I also say that this is my favourite version of the Night King, because for those who don't know, I think the Night King has been played by like 3 different actors. This one was a guy called Richard Brake, who I think really captured the essence of the Night King the best, in my opinion. I thought it was actually quite fun to see Jon interact with Stannis, because Ned of course really respected Stannis, and seeing Jon learn from Stannis, who's a pretty good leader, did a lot for the character, I think. What a shame he had to die at the end. I actually remember the whole summer was just memes of Kit Harington not having cut his hair. Okay, so season 6 is not actually that great from episodes 1 to 8. I mean, some stuff does happen. Jon comes back to life, he reunites with Sansa, we get Jorah and Daario, which like Jaime and Bronn is a pretty fun pairing, and that of course leads to the burning scene, which is pretty great. And also Dany's speech. I mean, she is a really good leader. She genuinely instills respect and love. We also get to see Arthur Dayne fight, and it was actually not an anticlimax. That fight was pretty well done. And that of course would lead to the Hold the Door scene, which is truly emotional, and in many ways one of the most important moments in the show. Also, has anyone else realized that that is Academy Award nominee Richard E. Grant? Oh yeah, and the Hound comes back. Whoa, wait. How did I get this far talking about Game of Thrones without mentioning Theon or Ramsay? Theon has one of my all-time favourite character arcs, and Alfie Allen is one of the most underrated actors on the show. And Ramsay, what a great villain. This guy was so fun to hate, and the main difference between him and Joffrey, I think, is that this guy could actually do it. He's like smart and a half-decent fighter. That along with a terrific performance made him even scarier than Joffrey. But yeah, not too much happens in the first 8 episodes, but 9 and 10, I mean, wow, just perfect. And I've heard people say it's good because we get what we want. You know, the good guy wins and stuff like that. But it's not entirely the case in my opinion. It is, of course, satisfying to see the good guys get some major wins for basically the first time in the show for a lot of these characters. But from a storytelling point of view, what makes these episodes great is that they balance the wins and losses quite nicely. There is an inherent air of hopelessness throughout most of the Battle of the Bastards, and Cersei kills some of our favourite characters when she blows up the Sept. Now, episode 9 is like the best of the best when it comes to spectacle. Those of you who know me and my taste in films know that I go crazy for long takes, and I think this one right here played a big role in making me like long takes, because it was glorious. But in my opinion, episode 10 takes it a step further. The opening scene is some of the best directing I've ever seen in anything, ever. The level of tension built through nothing but music, performances, and editing is just straight up inspirational. Wait, how have I also not talked about Ramin Djawadi and his music? This guy is unparalleled. The greatest compliment that I could give him is that if I ever got to make a big Hollywood movie or something like that, and I got to choose any composer I wanted, it would be him. I love Hans Zimmer and Justin Hurwitz and, you know, all those great composers whose work I basically worship, but there's just something about Djawadi's sound that I really identify with as a filmmaker. Anyway, back to episode 10. Yeah, people make videos about great tension building in like Sicario and stuff, but this is just as good. Just 10 minutes or so of a direct firing on all cylinders. Episode 10 is also by far the most efficiently written and paced episode in the show. So much stuff happens. Every time we cut to a new location, something mind-blowing happened. Except for this scene, which is foreshadowing, so still important. The episode features one of the most satisfying kills, one of the most satisfying alliances being formed, one of my favourite pieces of the score, and my single favourite edit in the whole show. If you really think about it, the writers don't actually have that much to do in this episode. There's actually not much talking, it's more just sequences that require a director to deal with. And when you look at the season 7 reveal of Jon's parents with the season 6 one, it's very obvious which one is better. People often ask me how do you tell what good directing is, and in my opinion, it's these small moments and creative decisions. to have the score come in like this to complement the simple camera work and just one edit with no dialogue, that for me is Game of Thrones at its finest. And you know what? I'll say it, I don't think the show has actually reached the heights of episode 10 again. So season 7, yeah, this was when things started to get a little bit dumb. A lot of things don't really make sense. Tyrion's plan for them to go beyond the wall and get a White Walker was just kind of stupid. They got a dragon killed, which in turn allowed the White Walkers to get through the wall. So if they didn't go, the White Walkers probably would have never gotten through. It was just kind of a dumb way to move the story forward. And the Deus Ex Machina bit was literally just to get people in bars to cheer. Also, Benjen rocks up and gets wasted out of absolutely nowhere. I think in many ways it was at this episode that made people kind of take a long, hard look at the show and realize that D&D might not actually be very good writers, especially after they went off book. I actually remember back then saying that this was like the greatest episode of all time, and I just want to go back in time and punch myself in the face, to be honest with you. It is fun though. I think the whole of season 7 works this way. Most of it doesn't make sense, but it is quite fun. Jon meets Daenerys, we get a lot of reunions that season that were really fun. The loot train attack was incredible, we finally got to see the Dothraki fight in an open field, and in a way kind of took us back to seasons 2 and 3, with a lot of battle planning and conflicts between houses and different sides sort of outsmarting each other. It also has a place very near and dear to my heart because it was the first season in a way I kind of watched properly. I was back home in Thailand when season 7 came out, and I would wake up at 7:30 every Monday morning for an 8 o'clock start to watch it live, and after that I would talk to my friends about it, and you know, it was a really, really great experience and something I will never forget. Although I never really bought Jon and Daenerys' romance, it was still quite fun to see someone stand up against Daenerys. Throughout most of the show, people just agree with her, and if they don't, then they die. So it was nice to see someone actually oppose her and stand up for himself, which of course would kind of be undone in season 8.
You are my queen. She is our queen. She is my queen. You will always be my queen. She is our queen.
I also loved Jaime's arc this season. One of my favourite scenes in the season is when he leaves Cersei and goes off by himself, finally getting rid of this disease, if you will. Of course, that would get ruined as well. My biggest problem with season 7 was Tyrion. He just kept getting dumber and dumber, his plans made no sense. He lost most of his charisma once he grew that beard and just felt like he wasn't being written by someone who had a genuine understanding of the character. I will say that I think I like season 7 a lot more than most people because some of the filmmaking was truly awesome, and being someone who really loves that part of the process, I think I was able to appreciate the season more than most. But I will say that some of the storytelling flaws with this season did get me to be quite concerned for I think most of you will probably agree with me when I say that season 8 is one of the biggest letdowns in TV history. But before we go full on, I do want to quickly say that after having a lot of conversations with lots of different friends who all have different opinions on the show and each episode and, you know, where they want each characters to go, we have basically unanimously agreed that season 8 was nowhere near as good as it could or should have been, but also that this is one of the best examples of a cast and crew and basically every department of the show pouring their heart and soul into the making of each episode. From the VFX and the production design to the acting and the score, just everyone working so hard and with so much passion. It was so inspirational, and I have nothing but respect and thanks to all those departments, all but one. And I'm pretty sure you know exactly which department that is.
While Dany kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet and Euron's forces, they certainly haven't forgotten about her.
Shut your fucking mouth! No problem, John. Shut the fuck up, you cunt!
When it comes to the story, when it comes to the characters, season 8 makes almost zero sense. I thought episode 1 was very average. I absolutely loved episode 2. It was probably the happiest episode of the series, and we got moments that were actually earned. And they were some of the most emotional moments in the show. I'm talking Theon's return, Brienne's knighthood, Podrick's song, all masterfully executed scenes. And then we get to episode 3. Some of the main pros here were the score, which is always indisputably terrific. Miguel Sapochnik's direction was on point as always. It's not as good as Battle of the Bastards, mainly because the plans make no sense, but I feel like they did the best with what they had. The cinematography also, if you watch it on a nice screen, is actually stunning. You can actually see what's going on. I also thought the editing was terrific. Just everything about the technical aspects I really loved. The story, on the other hand, is one gigantic clusterfuck. A lot of people, including the actors, have already covered this, so I'm gonna go as fast as possible. Arya should not have killed the Night King, it should have been Jon, and if you were so dead set on having it be Arya, then make it at least something more dynamic than just jumping out of the shadows. Maybe she's fighting in the Godswood, and just as she's about to get defeated, Theon, who's on the verge of death, takes one last stab at the Night King to distract him. Or maybe she uses someone else's face to get to him. There's a video out there about how she should have used Beric's face, and I know much more qualified people have already covered the battle plans, but oh my god. The Dothraki charge was senseless. Putting your artillery in front of the barricades is just a whole other level of dumb. In fact, having everyone in front of the barricade is just mind-boggling. Like many, I believe that the Night King should have been the final villain. For those of you who disagree, let me tell you why. Every great sci-fi or fantasy franchise has had two main villains. The big boss, the one who does evil for the sake of evil, and the smaller, more complex one who has more human motivations and is actually far more interesting than the big boss. They have more screen time and interact with the good guys. Basically, they are the better character, but within the context of the story, they aren't as written to be the final foe. Some examples include Palpatine and Vader, Voldemort and Snape, Sauron and Gollum, Ozai and Azula, and of course in Game of Thrones we have the Night King and Cersei. The Night King, although not as interesting as Cersei, was set up as the final boss, which means that Game of Thrones, being a show so focused on characters, should have at least given him some depth, which of course they didn't. And of course you could also say that Game of Thrones has always been about breaking tropes and conventions of storytelling, but if you wanted that, then just don't have the Night King, don't have a final boss, and don't set him up as the biggest threat for 8 years. The writing for episode 3 was so shit that the threat had no wider impact on the world, and to be honest with you, could have just been cut out. I mean, it had no effect on 5 and 6. You don't open a show with the White Walkers only to have them killed off halfway through the final season. You don't have all the characters saying they're the most dangerous threat only to have it resolved with one stab in one proper battle. That is the definition of shit subversion. And you might be wondering how I would end the season. Well, I don't know if I'm gonna do like a proper full-on rewrite video, but there are tons of really great how it should have ended style videos on YouTube, and to be quite honest with you, any one of them would have been better. So let's move on to the last 3 episodes. The first half of 4 was fun, but didn't really matter because nothing of importance happened. A lot of stuff happened in the second half, but it was rushed, shit, and made no sense. David Nutter directed it quite well though, especially the early dialogue scenes. Shooting a scene with that many actors and working out the staging is very difficult, and he pulled it off. Also, this shot is amazing. Episode 5 was another Miguel Sapochnik directed one, and again, the filmmaking is off the charts. Production designer Deborah Riley and her team basically built a chunk of King's Landing. Fabian Wagner's cinematography was stunning, and the camera work as well. These long takes were pretty impressive. And again, we get to the story. Varys should not have died. Jaime and Cersei should not have died in the way they did. Maybe Cersei could have had the building fall on her, but certainly not Jaime. They went back on 7 seasons of character development just to have him fight Euron, who also should have died right here. You could have just had Cersei refuse the surrender and keep going no matter what, which would then prompt Jaime to kill her in a similar way he did to the Mad King. So it would actually be poetic and fulfill the Valonqar prophecy. There was just almost zero conflict in the way they tied up his character. His final scene with Tyrion was great though. I also liked the way the Hound went out. It was quite poetic to see him die by fire. Although it was emotional, I don't think Arya would turn around, especially when she's that close. Drogon can also somehow destroy all these ships and Scorpions in an instant, even though a slightly smaller Drogon in Season 6 took ages to burn down one ship, and there were 3 dragons then. Also, the Golden Company is up there with Dawn as the definition of wasted potential. And of course, Daenerys. She's someone who has always tried to restrain her dark side and be a good person, only to have a significant portion of that love reciprocated with rejection. And she's lost a lot of people along the way, so I completely understand if she was like, fuck it, I'm done being nice. I'm completely okay with her burning down the Red Keep, burning her metaphorical wheel. But no matter how dark she went, I think we can all agree she would never have killed all those innocents. She literally contradicted herself in her final speech, and if they wanted her to go a bit mad, then that's fine, but they needed at least one more episode to build up that rage. Episode 6 was, strange. I don't like most of the episode. I thought the pacing was so messy. There are these long shots of people just walking around in the first half, and so many time jumps in the second. It just didn't feel like a finale. There was no sense of urgency for most of the episode, especially when you compare it to previous finales like 3, 4, and 6. There is not a single dull moment in those episodes. So much happened, and it's all done so efficiently. Whereas this episode felt quite lifeless for most of it. Yes, there are some cool shots, and we had a truly amazing moment with Tyrion and his siblings. The Iron Throne getting melted was a nice way of saying out with the old and in with the new. But then they ended up having a king anyway, so I personally expected Daenerys to die and that it would be Jon who killed her, but almost everything about that scene just didn't feel right. To sum up my feelings about Dany's conclusion, I will say that I think the character deserved better. Emilia Clarke deserved better. This was a great character, and as I mentioned throughout the video, she's a great leader and a good person. She really did deserve better. And also, what is Jon's purpose now? They spent all these years building him up as this kind of prince that was promised, and he was the son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, and he just goes back to the Night's Watch without actually doing anything. Like I said, I'm really happy that he's back at the Night's Watch, but he should have done at least something meaningful aside from kill Daenerys before he returns. This was a guy that was destined to be the hero, and he ends up with basically nothing. That is not subversion, it's just lazy storytelling and not fulfilling all these different plot threads that you've been setting up for years. The second half of this episode is weird. Bran becomes king, which I don't hate, because at this point the throne is kind of redundant, and I would much rather see my favourite characters go out and do their thing rather than be king or queen. So to put Bran, who to put it frankly is no one's favourite character, on the throne is kind of logical. He would make a lot of wise decisions, and it also lets some of the other characters fulfill their arcs in a nice and meaningful way. The small council scene was fun, but felt a bit too fanservice-y. Personally, I wanted Sansa on the Iron Throne, so to see her as Queen of Winterfell was the second best thing, so I'm okay with that. I really liked Arya's ending, which was a nice callback to Season 4, and I thought I'd finish talking about Season 8 with Jon. Going back to the Captain America comparisons, like Cap, Jon is someone who has never really been able to do what he wants, so it was a nice cathartic ending to see Jon finally go back to where he belongs. So in my opinion, I thought the last 10 to 15 minutes of the episode were basically perfect. The music, editing, and performances worked super well, and the final shot was in many ways the most meaningful, as Game of Thrones started off with men of the Night's Watch going beyond the wall in fear, only to have a man of the Night's Watch go beyond the wall with hope. So in a way, I do feel like the last 10 minutes did a lot for the episode and the season as a whole. It brought us back to the roots of the show, giving me what I felt was a nice cathartic conclusion. It didn't suck the hope out of me, and also wasn't some fairy tale ending where everyone lives happily ever after. I thought it was a nice balance, and in a way, everything from this shot onwards basically works as its own short film in a way. So before we end the video, I just thought I'd do some quick fun ranking, so here we go. First, let's rank the seasons. 4, 3, 6, 2, 1, 7, 5, 8. Top 5 episodes: Winds of Winter, Battle of the Bastards, The Children, Watchers on the Wall, and number 5 is a tie between Hardhome, Spoils of War, The Mountain and the Viper, and A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Top 5 main characters: Tyrion, Jaime, Arya, Jon, and Tywin. Yes, I count Tywin as a main character because he had a lot of screen time when he was alive. Top 5 supporting characters: Olenna, Ygritte, Bronn, Brienne, and the Hound. Also, special mention to Oberyn, who was more of a guest character, but damn did he leave an impression. Top 5 moments of performance: Tyrion's trial scene, Jaime's bath scene, Catelyn's Jon Snow monologue, Cersei's conversation with Tyrion in Season 7, and Tywin walking up the steps like a badass motherfucker and saying,
"We could arrange to have you carried."
Top 5 battles: Battle of the Bastards, Battle of the Wall, Loot Train Attack, and Hardhome. Top 5 most emotional deaths: Ygritte, Robb and Catelyn, Hodor, Shae, and Theon. Top 5 most satisfying deaths: Joffrey, Ramsay, the Sand Snakes and Trystane Martell, Walder Frey, Ollie, and special mentions to Hizdahr Zo Lorak and Lyanna Mormont, who has her fans, but in my opinion is the definition of the phrase overstaying their welcome. Top 5 deaths that should have been impactful but weren't. I can't seem to think of any. No, I can't seem to think of any. So to wrap up this video, which has been my most ambitious project as a YouTuber by far, I wanted to say thank you to everyone, from George R.R. Martin, to the actors, to the stuntmen who get burnt alive for our entertainment. I want to thank D&D as well, because despite the fact that their off-book writing kind of sucks, we would not have the TV version of Game of Thrones without them. They were the ones who really got it started. So to anyone and everyone who has played a part in the creation of a show that has changed my life and the lives of so many others and made that Scotland trip bearable, thank you.